Hi everyone! Welcome back to another episode of Fridays with a Ranger. I'm Ranger Shannon with Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail in beautiful Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm joined once again by my pet Syrian hamster, Honorary Ranger Fig. She's here today with her little ranger hat. We're back again at the kitchen table in my apartment, however, we've changed up our scenery once again. So today I have quite a few photos of Sacagawea and York. I have two illustrations of their portraits on the side here to my left. And then on the right, I also have two illustrations of them. One of them is an illustration of Sacagawea standing with her baby, John Baptiste, otherwise known as Pomp. The other illustration shows York holding a rifle in one hand and with a deceased deer wrapped around his neck that he's hunted. Fig's also set up a lovely campsite for herself over to my right. So she's got a nice campfire going, and I can see her now sitting in her tent. She's surrounded by beautiful pine trees with a lovely view of a mountain range and the lake. Looks like you're having a lot of fun, Fig, huh? Now, before we get into today's topic, I want you to take a moment to think about how easy it is for many of us to access our basic needs to survive. We can get water from our faucets to drink and bathe with. We can use electricity to provide light to see in the dark, and we can cook by turning on the heat on our stoves. Now, imagine you're in the middle of the wilderness with no access to any of these things. No heat, no water, no shelter, no electricity. How would you keep warm? How would you bathe and hydrate yourself? What would you do to cook your food? These are the challenges that the Corps of Discovery faced for over 2 years as they navigated their way across the country during the Lewis and Clark expedition from 1803 to 1806. So let's talk about how they overcame some of these challenges by making fire. Shown is a watercolor illustration of a campfire smoldering on a bed of sticks. Fires were important for the Corps of Discovery members to survive as they were used for cooking their food, keeping them warm, and protecting them from wild animals and other threats. Shown is an illustration of two Corps of Discovery members sleeping next to a burning campfire on a snow-covered campground, while another crew member stands next to a different burning campfire, warming himself in the distance. They use several different methods to make fire. However, their preferred method required a flint and steel. The flint and steel method was used as far back as the Dark or Middle Ages, the period from the 5th to the 15th century. Now here I'm holding the steel, otherwise known as a striker. So it's about 2 inches long and a centimeter wide. It's got a long straight part with 2 curved hooks on both ends. It almost resembles a hook on a drawer that you could use to open a cabinet or a dresser. Now here is the flint, which is a type of rock. It's really smooth on one side, and then on the other side it's a little more bumpy. This is about 1.5 inches long and about 2 centimeters thick. The edges are more smooth, but there's some jagged parts, and it sort of has a gray coloration with some specks of white and tan. Now, fire is dangerous, so to avoid any accidents, I'm not going to be making a fire using flint and steel. However, I am going to explain how it works. Please don't try this at home. So first, I'm going to take the steel in my right hand. The hook should be facing outward away from me, and the long flat side should be facing inward towards my left hand. So I'm going to take my forefinger and index finger and sort of wrap it from the back, and then wrap my fingers around the hook with my thumb between the hook and the flat end, sort of making a fist around it. And then I'm going to take the flint in my other hand. I'm going to hold it so that the jagged, sharp end is facing inward towards my steel. Now what I'll do to create sparks is I'll just take my steel and do sort of sharp downward blows on the sharp end of the flint. So I'll show you a couple examples of this. Again, please don't try this at home. Now, if I were going to create a fire using flint and steel, I would need a flammable material that could ignite from the sparks. This is known as tinder. An example of tinder is jute. It looks sort of like rope yarn all braided together in a bunch of different strands. If the Corps of Discovery didn't have access to tinder, they would use other materials such as dried fish, sage, or even buffalo dung. It's likely that each member of the Corps of Discovery carried their own flint and steel in a little pouch with them in case they got lost or separated from the rest of the party. However, we don't know for sure. However, what we do know is that the flint and steel greatly assisted them with surviving during the expedition. And that's it for this week's episode of Fridays with the Ranger. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Ranger Shannon with Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail, and I hope you'll be back next week. Stay safe. Bye.